Those Were the Days is filmed before a live internet audience.
Hello and welcome to Those Were the Days, the show where we look at classic TV through a modern lens with nostalgic eyes. For the next 4 episodes, we're exploring the vast landscape of science fiction TV. Tonight, we board our Leviathan and race across the galaxy, evading the peacekeepers, going on some thrilling adventures, and making sure we don't end up in Hesmana. And while I'm your pilot for this particular episode, Travis, I need a crew to help me out. So joining me, we have Dominar Audi.
So science fiction has given us all kinds of solutions to how do they eat in the future / on alien planets. In Star Trek, they just have replicators for all the different aliens that exist. In Galaxy Quest, they have replicators for all the different not real aliens they think exist. In Star Wars, you've got rehydrating bread type stuff. In He-Man, they were surprised that meat came on bones. Deep cut. So what kind of food do we find on this show? Well, it seems like Chinese takeout and oh, that's never food. All kinds of puffy, poofy, super ridiculously colored never food. Does that mean Neverland, second star to the right and straight on till morning, is actually an alien world? Cool.
Love it.
Also, we have with us the Earthman with no idea what the Dren is going on, Steven.
We have a theme. Here we go. For an appetizer, I tried to make pigs in a blanket, but I didn't have wieners, so I just rolled a potato in cookie dough. The entree is spaghetti and meatballs, but without meat or sauce, I just used ground up boot leather and ketchup. For dessert is a lemon meringue pie, but I didn't have lemons or eggs, so I just took a packet of Tang and sprinkled it over some whipped cream. Time to belly up to the bar, folks.
And of course, our resident Pau, Amy.
I have to completely change my intro now because it was also about puffy rice noodles and Australian licorice treats. So when you're flying on a spaceship with an assortment of weird aliens, a lot of things are going to go wrong, but don't worry, a white man is here.
Hang it up. I'm done. I quit. It's over.
So tonight, we're talking about Farscape, which was a show that ran from 1999 to 2003. In the US, it was on Sci-Fi Channel. It was on BBC Two or something in the UK. It's an Australian production. The show was created by creator Rockne S. O'Bannon. He's actually known for a couple of other series that you might have heard of before. He created Alien Nation back in the 80s.
Ooh.
He also created Sequest DSV, along with eventually creating this, Defiance. He got his start writing and selling some spec scripts for Amazing Stories on NBC. He wrote all sorts of stuff. He was an executive producer on the Constantine series that ran a few years ago, stuff like that. So he's been around for a while, done a lot of science fiction, fantasy stuff. And he had this idea to make this show. He came up with it in the early to mid 90s, him and Henson, Brian Henson. And they wanted to make it, and they were going to call it Space Chase. And eventually, they finally got money to make the show, and they put their pilot out in 1999, and we got Farscape. And Farscape is the story of very American, John Crichton, who is a test pilot, and he takes his capsule, the Farscape 1, up for a test flight, gets sucked through a wormhole, and ends up on the other side of the galaxy, where he runs into a ragtag group of wrongfully imprisoned characters who are fleeing the authoritarian government there called the Peacekeepers on a living ship, a Leviathan called Moya. He ends up on the ship, and hilarity ensues. They go on all sorts of crazy adventures. It has a lot of serialized storytelling, a lot of bottle episodes that eventually, as the series went on, it became more and more this kind of overarching mythology. It ran for 4 seasons and then one 2-night made-for-TV movie called Farscape: The Peacekeeper Wars to kind of try and tie it up because they got canceled during their 4th season, sort of abruptly. But it's creature effects were done by the Jim Henson Creature Shop, and there's all sorts of puppets on here. The one that for me was the most impressive is Pilot,
Oh yeah.
which is the
So-
symbiotic. So real quick, Pilot was the symbiotic. He's symbiotically like linked with Moya, and that puppet took 6 puppeteers to do. He's a big 4-armed
It's a
creature,
giant puppet.
Yeah.
and it's huge.
If you watched the now gone from Disney because they're villains, Earth to Ned, you can see Ned's DNA very much in Pilot. I was like, okay, all right, that is like Pilot walked so Ned could run. I see this. Ned's not quite so giant, but
Yeah, Pilot was like 8 feet tall, I think, something like
Huge.
that. Crazy sets. The show was very colorful, very bright. We're going to get into some of that, but first, I want to know from the 3 of you if you have any history with the show at all. I'm going to start with Audie.
Yeah, I remember watching it sometimes. It's one of those shows that I never got sucked into, but there were times when it was on and I was like, yeah, I'll watch. And I think I knew some of the story and plot and details and stuff enough that like watching this again, it felt like, oh, this is a little comfortable blanket putting this on again. And gosh, I just got to say, the one thing I love about this show is that we've got the puppets going on, but they are absolutely treated as seriously as any other character. Like that's the one thing I
Yeah.
appreciate about this show so much.
Yeah.
That's that
Amy, how
Henson
about you?
DNA in there.
Yes, it is. Very much so. Amy, did you have any connection to Farscape prior to
no,
me forcing you to watch this?
this is my first time.
Okay.
0. I mean, so I was trying to think back, right? Like I was looking at it, and so this would have been like when I was in college, and so I think I just like missed it entirely. You know, I mean, it just didn't. It just never. It never made it.
It was plagued by some erratic scheduling by Sci-Fi Channel. They would move
Sure.
it sometimes, or they would have these big gaps. There would be like 4 months during a season between
Sure.
episodes. Not like they wouldn't end season 1 and start season 2 3 months later. They would be 4 episodes from the end of season 2, and then it would be 3.5 months later they'd pick it back up for some reason. It was very odd the way they did that, but yeah, I could see that. Steven, how about you? Had you heard of this show? Did you know anything about it prior to?
I had not, Travis. Actually, I did. I'd heard of the show. I'm aware of the name. If I was hearing people talking at a restaurant behind me and they said Farscape, I'd be, oh yeah, that's that show on TV. Now, I didn't know anything about it. So I'm going to share with you something real quick because I did text Ashley about it, who, if friends of the show may know her as Smashy from Horseshoes and Hand Grenades. And I figured she watched it because she was like Sci-Fi Channel all day. And I said, hey, do you remember Farscape? And she lost her mind with yes, tons of exclamation points. And she said, it's so cheesy. I loved it. And then this is what I had to go on is what I was about to watch. It's a very alpha dude that kind of mellows out because he meets a very alpha chick, 2 lunatic chicks, a megalomaniac puppet, and the coolest beard in the galaxy. And a living spaceship that has a symbiotic parasite as a pilot. It's also the first time I ever heard the word peacekeeper in a pejorative term. OMG, it's so good. So that was the description I had to go off of.
That's pretty
That's actually, yeah, that's pretty good.
Pretty spot on.
That fits a lot of it. Yeah. So I mentioned that Rockne O'Bannon created the show. So the show starred Ben Browder as John Crichton, who is the most American of Americans. This was the first thing I remember Ben Browder ever seeing him in. He's since we went on to do some of the final seasons of Stargate SG-1. And he pops up here and there and stuff. I see him every once in a while, and I always like seeing him because I have the connection to this show. So I'm like, hey, it's the dude that played Crichton. He is very much, that's an apt description. He is very alpha male, especially at the start of the show. We watched an episode during season 1. He does mellow out as the series goes on, but he is obsessed with getting back. He wants to get back home. That's basically his motivation throughout the entire thing. And when he got sucked through the wormhole in the pilot episode, he got spit out, and there was like a dogfight going on, and he bounced off of another ship and accidentally killed the pilot of that ship, who just so happened to be like a general's brother. And so a lot of the first season's tension was the Peacekeeper general, who's actually played by Lanny John Tupu, who did the voice of Pilot as well. He just has this like blood vendetta against Crichton and will follow him to the end of the galaxy. And that was pretty much the plot of season 1. But Ben Browder, Claudia Black, he was the lone American on basically the cast. Everyone else came from kind of Australia and New Zealand. And the more episodes you watch, the more obvious that gets, because all of the side characters have Aussie and Kiwi accents.
Well, Sci-Fi basically operated in Australia and New Zealand all the time. That was like the CW in Vancouver, Sci-Fi New Zealand. Mm-hmm. That's just what happens. Yeah.
Claudia Black played a character named Erin Soon. She is a peacekeeper. The peacekeepers are this like authoritarian government in this part of the galaxy, and a lot of them are. They look human, but the race is called Sebation, and it was obviously it's a budget way to have aliens because they're not humans, and there are plot points, there are stories that base around how they're different from John, but John looks like them. So especially early on, anybody they run into, they assume John is a peacekeeper, and the peacekeepers are the bad guys. I also love, we didn't see it in this episode, but the peacekeepers wear like all leather. Like their whole uniforms are leather, and they had to ADR everything involving them because the onset audio is just the onset audio is just the squeaking of leather.
Just constantly. Anybody in the cast got some saddle soap? I need to really. My elbows are squeaking.
We also met Ka Dargo, played by Anthony Simcoe. He was the tall one with the kind of dreadlock looking things and the really interesting beard. Triangle nose.
Okay.
He's that guy is tall. He's like 6'6", 6'7", just big imposing figure. He is probably my favorite character, and I love the fact that Audie for our episode art drew me as him because I love Dargo. He is very much Farscape's version of like a Klingon, but as the series goes on, you learn so much more about him, and they're all criminals when he meets them, and he did what he was imprisoned for, but it was because of like it had to do with him losing his wife and his son. Then we meet his son later, and he's got a really awesome sword that also doubles as a rifle, which is a thing I had never seen before. He has a sword, but then he can like flip a handle, and the blade splits, and it's a rifle.
That's
awesome. Of course.
It's just a cool looking thing because why not?
I would like one.
We also had the actor that you might know if you've ever seen Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior. Virginia Hay is in that. She's also a very well-known Australian actor. She played Pau Zota Zan. She's the blue one. And her race are plant-based. So she is a living plant, which had some very fun episodes where they would get close to stars and she would go and lay out in the sun decks.
Photosynthesis.
Because
it works
it was
same
photosynthesis,
everywhere.
but it was orgasmic for her.
Oh,
there you go.
She very much enjoyed getting out in the sun.
Maybe that's the way plants feel all the time. Who are we to know?
Yeah. We don't know.
We don't know.
And she is a Pa'u, which is a kind of a priest sort of thing, and they made a lot of plots around that for a little while too. And then Moya is the ship. And Moya
that took me like a long time
yeah.
to piece together.
I had to figure that out.
I did drop you midway into the show, and this show is dense. So I didn't expect that you would kind of grasp everything. I more or less, this was a baptism by fire.
We belly flopped into the deep end of the pool, Travis.
Yes. But Moya is a living biomechanical ship. And at this point in the series, she's also pregnant. But she was, the peacekeepers had put a restraining collar on her so that she couldn't like run away. And their faster than light travel in this show is what's called starburst, which Leviathans can do. But because of her being pregnant and her power reserves being low, we get the plot of this episode. I'll get to that. Because starburst has very specific things it can do.
This is the weirdest thing I've ever heard in my life. Also, like I'm in a ship and then it's pregnant, and its name is Bora, and I'm just like, what is going on? At this point in the show, I don't even understand what I'm watching anymore, and I'm struggling.
And it's part of why the show only lasted 4 seasons, because it
Yeah,
is
really.
if you got
You're not
into
getting in. Yeah.
Yeah,
If
4 is
if you didn't
impressive.
get in, you're good luck. Have a good one.
but if you get into it, it's really great sci-fi and it's a lot of fun, but it's very dense and it's hard to get into.
Yeah.
I have
There
to
are
mention
people
though,
who
Domino.
like the dark crystal, and there are people who don't like the dark crystal, and I feel like this is the same. It's like subsets.
Yeah.
You know, you're gonna like that's real weird, but I'm digging it. Versus that's real weird, and what else is on? You got those two categories.
Yeah. The Muppets or puppets that they had were Pilot and Dominar Rigel the 16th, who's the little guy.
He's
And
real cute.
he's cute, he's obnoxious, he's very full of himself. Yeah, he's a lot of fun. Also a fun little trivia fact for him. His species, when they get nervous, they fart helium. So that was a fun
course
episode
they
when they just
do.
all because
Yeah.
why not?
Also, when you get a chance, look up his voice actor on IMDb, and you'll see he has the same eyebrows. It's like
Yeah, no, they modeled the eyebrows after the voice actor.
Oh, that's
Not
good.
even a joke. But this particular episode, we started out with the whole crew is sitting in the mess hall eating, and they're all complaining because leading up to this, Moya has become pregnant and she can't starburst, so she can't run. And if the peacekeepers show up, they're going to get captured, and none of them want that because the peacekeepers want Crichton dead and they want all the prisoners back. So they're all talking about leaving Moya. And Pilot, of course, can hear all this because he has little, they're called DRDs. They're diagnostic robotic droids. And they're just little RC cars with antennas on them that wander around. But they are kind of the nerves of Moya, and they gather information. And so they're overhearing the conversation. Pilot pops up. And Moya, the thing with it being a living ship is that the ship is a character. So Moya, the Leviathan creatures, they want to have a crew and they want to serve that crew. That's just how that's in their DNA.
Yeah.
And the pilots are symbiotes with them. So they're sort of the mouthpiece for Moya. That's why, if you noticed in the episode, Pilot always refers to itself as we,
Yeah.
because it's Pilot and Moya. So Moya is very upset that her crew wants to leave because they are a family. Especially at this point, they've gone through a lot. So she wants to prove that she can still do it and goes to jump into Starburst, which, think of Starburst kind of like the idea in Event Horizon of sort of folding space and kind of traveling through the space between space.
Sure.
That's what Starburst is like. So what ends up happening here in this episode is she doesn't have the power to do it properly and gets stuck, which has never happened before. So in this, it splits into 4 distinct looking things. And this was, I think, where I lost Amy.
That was the worst. It was the worst.
It was hard, Travis. It was.
Travis, it was the worst.
oh my god.
Well, I think I still have my barf bag over here with me because it was. I watched it with headphones, and I've never been more like confused.
Welcome to
and broken.
Tinnitus Simulator.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh God.
Now, I will say,
I'm
that-
I'm not gonna lie, guys. I skipped a lot of it.
Uh-huh.
I did a lot of forwarding.
Okay.
Took my headphones.
This
directly
isn't-
I
out.
got to put my foot down and say I was with it. I love this.
Oh
Like,
wow.
I was all about it. I was like, oh, okay. Especially
from
having
a-
the different ships, different colors. I was like, oh, I get this.
From a conceptual standpoint, it's a cool idea to have like this weird inner space, and the ship got broken up into these base elements, and they all have a different effect on everybody. But I can understand it being difficult to watch and kind of experience. The show itself didn't do this kind of thing like that to that level a lot at all. That doesn't happen a ton.
It felt like a Star Trek plot that just went off the rails. Oh, we're caught in we did that in Star Trek all the time. We're caught in a wormhole, we're caught in a weird entity, we're caught in some gravity thing. We do this a lot.
Yeah.
And then they were like, oh, but reality has been ripped asunder. Oh, you're not affected by the blue noise. Well, then you should stay here. No, I don't want to stay here. Oh, now I'm screaming because the yellow place is bad. Well, then you should
Yeah,
have
and
stayed in the blue
so
place
and
or the
and
red
were
place.
you
That's what it was.
yeah, were you watching the series up until this point, you'd know that that is who her character is. That's the character of Chiana, and she came along partway into the season, and her whole thing was she is rebellious and doesn't do what anyone ever tells her to do.
Yeah,
So,
well,
in
she
fact,
paid for it, so.
oh yeah, no, she pays for it a lot. Trust me. Um, so
But it's okay
basically,
because there's a white man here.
I just
Everything's
to
gonna be fine.
they need to figure out what the hell is going on, and they eventually do. And there's a creature that's also trying to like claw its way into the ship,
All right.
some sort of entity.
yeah.
So that was fine. I was fine with that. Right up until he goes, wait, it's prime numbers. It's not trying to hurt us. It's trying to communicate. Like, okay, but like what it could be communicating is I'm going to kill you. Like that is also communication. And what are you doing?
Well, if you caught his dialogue there at one point, though, they're stuck. They're not going anywhere. And Zan says something to the effect of like, "Well, what happens if you're wrong?" And he goes, "Then I die a few minutes before you do." Like,
Yeah.
I can't really do it. Like, this
But
is
he
the
just
best
said it.
option.
He was
in
just
a,
so certain. No, this is prime numbers and they're trying to communicate
Yeah.
and this is perfect. Like,
that is his character in that he is very certain about a lot of things and usually wrong and proven wrong. So for him to be right in this instance was something of an outlier. But he eventually figures out that they're stuck, and while they're trying to back out, the entity within this realm, which was a very trippy sequence. That again, low budget. Like how do you show something like that with no budget?
yeah.
You do what they did in the episode. But it tells them no, go forward, and so they do, and they get out, and everything is restored, and now they're all happy again. It's a very like
And we're
you didn't
back to
miss much
eating-
in the way of
We're back to
story,
eating
Amy.
puffy noodles and
Yep.
Australian
never-
It did,
licorice.
it did feel like there was 45 minutes they had to fill, and they had a good 10 minutes of chatting at the table, which was fun. The whole comment about how long was it under your butt getting delicate made me laugh out loud.
Yeah.
Like, honestly,
Yeah.
that was amazing. But then, like, the minute we hit warp speed, and they do this, like, effect where a thing happens, and then overlaid on top of that, the thing happens again, nothing will wreck me more than that kind of thing. Delayed audio and video where it does that. I was just like, oh, thank God I'm not in a theater or something watching this, because I
The
would.
part for me was like I was like the part for me was like so after he talks to the entity and it's oh no, we've got to go forward, and I was like, oh God, now he's gonna go through all of them again, and I can't do it again. I can't. He's just gonna go through them all again.
Amy, this
Oh,
is
no.
my notes from the show. I'm just gonna share them as I wrote them down. I wrote the audio department's
Yes.
working really hard on this one. Yep, I can't handle it. Yep, I'm gonna throw up a lot. Throwing up, nauseated. And then the thing about Mippa Pippi, and then I was happy again.
Oh yeah, that was great.
So one of the things that makes this show a lot of fun is the language involved in it. Every sci-fi show has to have some form of universal translator, right?
Sure.
And it's
Yeah.
usually like Star Trek has theirs, but occasionally it doesn't work. This show had in the pilot episode, he gets onto the ship and he can't understand any of them.
Yeah.
Like Dargo is screaming in his language, and they're all yelling in these different languages, and he has no clue what's going on. And then one of the DRDs comes up and just pokes him in the leg, and within 30 seconds he can understand them. It's translator microbes, which in this part of the galaxy everyone is injected with at birth, so they can all just understand each other. And I've always loved that as just we're just going to hand wave away the whole language barrier thing right away and never have it be a problem again.
Yeah.
How does that work, though? What language do you develop when you're injected with understanding all languages at birth? What does that become? If everything sounds,
Don't
Huh.
know.
I was
Huh.
like, what does that do? I guess you hear everything in your
Interesting.
language, which would be the
Basically.
primary. But how do you know what your language is when you can understand all? Oh my gosh!
It's the Babelfish all over again.
Yeah, but it's like like oh my, space languages. Like, do you just know a language and do per species? And then it's like, oh, you're a Floridian, so you're gonna understand Floridilis. I don't know. This is sending me
That
down
is
a rabbit
actually,
hole.
I am
Translator
actually
thing
very
just make-
into that question.
Yeah,
But
this is
also, what I
weird.
like about it,
Translator thing
though,
just makes everybody go. Blah, 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 blah.
And they just all know. They're just trading thoughts, don't know it. Oh my god.
pretty much.
Uh-huh.
But what's great about it, though, is that it also does a thing that I really liked that was a joke or a line in Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home, which is the translator microbes give you the words, but not necessarily the context.
Sure.
Mhm.
And so John uses a lot of American slang and pop culture references. That's part of how they wrote his character. And some of the content of the show is the fact that nobody knows what the hell he's talking about, the Mippipippy being one of them. So he says that, and that's what Dargo hears, and that's how he translates it. So he has like nicknames for everybody. He calls Rigel Sparky, he calls Chiana Pip, and these are all names for him, and they just run with it because they don't know. They don't know if it's a friendly thing or an insult or what. And it also, the show used stand-ins for swearing so that they could have things like frel was used. This is before, because I remember everybody would say fracking everything
yeah,
after
Battlestar.
Battlestar Galactica.
Worst.
I hated it so
Absolutely
much.
the worst.
Frel was
Secret swear.
before that, or
Stupid.
Dren. And
So
what it allowed them to do was it
Goram.
allowed them to have dialogue. Goram was one from Firefly.
Gosh,
Or they just
Um,
use Chinese.
And so, yeah, in Firefly, it was just Mandarin Chinese a lot for all their swearing. But that was another thing that this show did. But I liked the language barrier of like him talking about stuff and nobody getting his references, but he would just go with them anyway. He just kept using them. But they also had their own, time system. So you sort of heard it in this episode where they talk about ARNs and microts, and those were just stand-ins for minutes, seconds, hours. Cycles were years.
There's almost a National Lampoon level of humor going on, like instead of Pepsi, we called it Poopsie, and instead, you know what I mean? Like, that's one side of the humor I'm like, what are we doing? Come on, let's just.
But in this case, I think what the reasoning behind it wasn't so much for humor; it was just to make it a little bit. They didn't want to be Star Trek, and they didn't want. It didn't make sense to have everybody using colloquialisms that would make sense to Americans. So let's kind of create our own slang in here, and then drop an American inside of that, where he hears the words, but he maybe doesn't know what they mean right away, and he has to be taught that.
See, but
and
this
and
is-
also to just set itself apart from other shows.
And that's all well and good, but I wonder, like, is it a requirement of sci-fi to just try your best to take everything you
love
could
it.
grab onto and just mix and make it? It's the same thing, and we all know it, but we're gonna call it something different. And like to me, it's off-putting more than it's like it doesn't create a world for me. It just makes me go, it's seconds. No one watching this TV show gives a flip. They're not gonna think about it for more than 2 seconds. That you're saying seconds instead of microt or Wycrons or arbalobs or whatever you're going to make up. Like, it distracts me more than it actually helps. I'm dropped out of the world by having to understand the nonsensical stuff that they've made up. Because I know it's a TV show. It's not a historical document. It's not Galaxy Quest.
There was a great riff on that in Stargate SG-1 because, as I mentioned, Ben Browder became a cast member of that, and so did Claudia Black. The two of them were on Stargate SG-1, and there was an episode of that show where all of the members of the Stargate crew were pitching their own show ideas to a producer. And at one point, they pitched an idea for the show, and every time they would do that, they would do like the flash of, showing the show as they're describing it. And so they did this like, fake version of Farscape, and it was literally just 30 seconds of all sorts of random words, and then it cuts back and they're like, I don't even know what you were just saying there. I don't think anyone's going to get it, and they just move on. So they were ripping on their own show. It's something that I enjoyed about the show because at the time, all of the sci-fi that I was seeing was very similar.
Yeah.
It was a lot because everything was born out of Star Trek. Star Trek had been such a big thing, and we had by this point original series TNG, Voyager, and Deep Space Nine. Plus Babylon 5 was not the same as Star Trek, but it was still kind of Star Trek adjacent. And this was so different and colorful, and the Muppets aspect of it, and having those puppets, because those two were the main ones, Rigel and Pilot, but a lot of the alien species were either crazy makeup or puppets.
It looks
And they had
good.
some pretty good ones.
Yeah.
From a visual standpoint, nothing looked like Farscape at the time. After Farscape, there were a couple other shows like Lex and things that came along. But it was just really cool to see things like, a character that is completely blue and everything they wear is blue, and like just going with that color and having that stand out amongst other things in the show. I really enjoyed.
I really like the Muppets and everything, and I wasn't sure. I was just like, these are high quality. And then at the end, when I saw produced by Brian Henson, I was like, that's why they're so good. I see now.
And I think Brian Henson even directed the movie, the piece
Yeah,
of the movie that
he
came out.
basically secured the rights so that they could do the movie.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And this was a major influence on James Gunn with Guardians of the Galaxy. He took
see that.
some influence from that, and you can see that feel.
Oh, and the Protheans from Mass Effect look exactly like Pilot. Like, I noticed that right out of the gate. Like, have you ever played Mass Effect? And I was like, that's the same head. They just used the same idea. So it's definitely
weird.
influenced things.
Yeah, this is a show that I feel like I mention it to people, and a solid 70% of people I mention Farscape to just look at me like, I don't know what you're talking about. I've never heard of that before. But then you see or feel that influence in a lot of places. So it definitely had an audience that was very passionate for it. It's sort of, I know when it leaked online that the show was getting canceled in 2003, and midway through the season, they mentioned it's not getting picked up, and this is going to end it. And almost immediately there was a fan petition to keep the show going, and they wanted, kind of like what happened with Firefly and the Browncoats. Very similar thing, just a couple of years earlier, or right around the same time. A lot of shows came and went in 2003. I noticed.
Yeah. It's the end of an era, so to speak. It's a lot of sci-fi.
Yeah, we didn't see a couple of characters that I really like. There's a character in this named Scorpius who becomes kind of the big bad. He is a very weird looking character. He's got some whoever designed him definitely was into some S&M. There's a lot of strappy leather stuff, but they had him as a character, and then a projection that was sent into Crichton's brain to get information that is a separate character from the actual Scorpius. Same actor, same look and everything, but he becomes Harvey because John names him Harvey. And so he shows up in John's brain a lot, and John's the only one that can see him. So he hallucinates.
Oh, so like Harvey.
Very, very, very much like that. But that's why he named him Harvey, because he's the only one that can see him. And he's got a different personality from the actual Scorpius, which is a character that I very much liked, was Harvey, because the show got even weirder with him around, if you can imagine that.
I can't, Travis.
Trust me. It's a show that, like I said, it's very dense. It's hard to get into. If you do get into it, it's a lot of fun because it doesn't take itself too seriously, but it still tries to tell some decent stories. And it's all centered around this crew on the ship and how they get along. And they very much are a family. So they bicker like family, but they also have each other's back. That's one of the things I liked about this particular episode was, none of them wanted anything bad to happen to Moya and her baby, regardless of what was going on.
Right.
And that was a big thing. Like, they immediately were like, that moment where John is in Pilot's chamber with him, where you actually get to the scale of Pilot and how big he is. But John just being like, no, look, we should have been better about kind of how we were feeling about things and talking to you guys about it. And I just like that's the kind of thing that drew me. Like I got drawn into the show by the just weird look and the just chaotic energy. But then as I watched it more and more, it was characters that I started to care about because they actually wrote them pretty well. They have arcs and they have flaws, but they're also like inherently decent people to each other, even if there's times where they can't stand each other. So it felt very real in that way. It sounds like, if I had to venture a guess, I'm going to say at least 2/3 of you don't ever want to watch another episode of Farscape.
That's not entirely true. This episode was rough because of what happened in it. Like I'm not anti any of the weirdness. I might be fussy about the time thing and the weird words, but that's not gonna stop me
Yeah.
from enjoying a show. Like I'm really into stuff like this for characters. Like you were saying, this was about. It's about the characters, and I'm not put off by the rest of it. It was just I felt like I had eaten bad mushrooms in a forest and sat down to watch TV. That's not the experience I wanted when I sat down to watch the show today. So I would be happy to go back, skip season 1, episode 17, and just keep moving, and I might have a great time. I definitely there's a part of me that really wants to love this kind of stuff. And this, like, it's going to be a little difficult for me in Sci-Fi Month. Like, I gotta really tweak because I'm not a big deep sci-fi fan. Like what we're doing here, what this show is. This is like somebody who's only ever watched NBC sitcoms going to watch Lord of the Rings. It's just gonna melt their brain. Like it's deep fantasy, right? Like the fact that that's even remotely successful is an achievement. You know, so this kind of stuff is just deep sci-fi. So it's a little harder for me to wrap my brain around. But all in all, I'm not. I'm a bigger. I like it more than maybe you would think I do based on this episode. You know what I mean?
And definitely, I mean, I certainly grabbed one of the more difficult episodes.
Yes, you did.
As I thought about it tonight, leading up to the show, I realized, I probably could have picked a better, like, more accessible episode. But I picked this one because it was a bottle episode and it was self-contained on the ship. I didn't want it to get too much into like the lore and the planets and stuff because it's already dense enough. If you start adding in more characters, like it's enough to have just this ragtag group of half a dozen characters. You got to try and figure out what the hell they're saying half the time. But I mean that's good to know. And if you do, like, start at the beginning. Yeah. Give it a few episodes. If it doesn't hook you, no harm, no foul. But if you make it as far as episode 17 and skip that one, then you're probably in for a little while because they really do hook you and they get you into some interesting stuff. And again, it's fun sci-fi. When I was watching it at the time, it was, for me, I love Star Trek, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager. But by the time Farscape came around, I'm like, oh, this is so refreshingly different. Because it's just so completely bonkers. So, Amy, how about you? Do you think you would watch any more of this? Skipping this episode?
No, I mean, you've got a Henson involved, and so I'm there. And then also, like, the concept of the Leviathan ship is actually super interesting to me. If you are into that idea and you have not read J.F. Dubow's first novel, Life Engineered, that he doesn't talk about anymore, but that secretly I like best of all of them, you should, because it's not the same, but there are threads of similar concepts. And I like that part of it was interesting to me. And there's puppets, and I love puppets, and I just wanted it to be better.
It does get better because John, while he is a dumb, macho American, he gets put in his place a lot, and Aaron especially. The two of them have a relationship. They do kind of from the start. He's sort of like smitten with her right away, but they become very close. But the peacekeepers are kind of almost bred for war type things, but she is. The more time she spends away from the peacekeepers, the more kind of humanity that she gets, and sort of breaks away from that like regimented part of it, and she balances him out really well. Plus, he gets himself into a lot of really terrible situations because he's just an idiot, and the show isn't shy in telling you that. So, I think that overall, he becomes much more. He's much more palatable than like a single episode is going to give you.
Sure.
I love the living shit part of things too. The
Yep.
Leviathan, the idea of that. I actually my first car was named Moya
Mhm.
because of
Nice.
this show. It's really cool the way they do things because Moya being a living biomechanical ship, she becomes pregnant. When she gives birth to her child is was an experiment by the peacekeepers. So her child becomes a ship that has built-in weapons because the peacekeepers were trying something with her. So there's a whole big like plot that revolves around that and whether or not it should have happened and what they do with that. And it's interesting because it's a Leviathan but not like Moya. So they explored some other kind of neat, interesting things there too. But it's yeah. How about you, Audie? Would you watch any more?
Oh
of this?
yeah, like I said, I've watched some of it before. This makes me want to. It makes me want to watch the series, even though there's no way I'm going to get to it because I don't have time to try and squeeze in something else to watch like this. Um, but yeah, I'm definitely with you. I'm on board for this kind of sci-fi all the way. Like I love this episode. I loved what they did. I loved all the ways they handled it, even with the budget that they had. I thought it was really neat the ideas they pulled off, especially like how do we make it seem like the ship is getting eaten, cut off, and it's like, oh, we'll just put a bright light at this tunnel. Okay,
Yeah, you
simple
just
little
can't.
tricks like that.
There's a lot of that because the budget was not very big for this shows,
Hmm.
and you can tell that in a lot of episodes. But there's a charm to that for me too, because I like high concept sci-fi.
And I'm
I
okay with
love.
the budget there being less and spending it on the Henson puppets that
Mm.
just feel so
Yes,
real and they're
spending on
treated
those
so
puppets.
real.
Yeah, there's a lot of great behind the scenes shots of everybody with Pilot, and I always loved that. Again, 6 puppeteers to puppeteer that thing was
Huge.
pretty impressive,
That's a
and
lot.
then your voice actor on top of that.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But I mean, that's Farscape. It's like I said, this episode, the plot is very simple. It's basically they get stuck, they got to figure out their way out of it. They have other episodes that have more the plot's got more complex as it kind of went along because they started developing a lot of mythology around wormholes and the wormhole technology and just stuff, sci-fi stuff that happens. Um, but at its heart, it's basically just John wants to go home, and he can't figure out how to go home, and eventually he learns that this is now his home, and
Oh yeah,
he
that's
wants his
beautiful.
family and all of that.
Yeah.
So it's a really fun show as long as you can kind of break through the outer crust and get into it a little bit. That's the hardest part, and I think that's why it only made 4 seasons. You said kind of 4 seasons is pretty impressive for a cable show. It's at the time it did pretty well, but it could have lasted longer. I think if it was more accessible, because definitely if you didn't start off with Farscape by season 3, you're just like, you think this was confusing? Ooh, it gets worse.
Hmm.
It gets so much
It's
worse.
like a soap opera on
Um,
steroids. You can't just jump in. It's
kind
like
of,
it's
yeah.
too much.
It's
Hmm.
it's very much a space-based soap opera in a lot of
Yeah.
ways too. A lot of characters come and go. Uh, you have your kind of your core characters, but then some will come along and be on the ship for a few episodes, and then they leave, and like some of them come back, and some of them are just sort of you never hear about them again. They're just gone in some other part of the galaxy. So, but that's Farscape. That's kind of kicking off our sci-fi month. A month of science fiction. I figured why not start us off with something completely insane, and
That's
it
a
can
good
only
pick.
go up from here,
Yeah.
right?
I
It
don't
can
know
only
that
get
it can.
Yeah. I
Have you
don't.
seen old sci-fi? Like things could get
Yeah.
real questionable.
so. I was right at the edge of kind of what we determined to be classic TV, but this was old enough,
Yeah.
so
It's in the
I
rules.
figured that it worked.
Yeah.
Let's see. Next week, Audie is bringing us a show. What are
Hmm.
you bringing us? What do you got for us?
So I was trying to think. There was a couple I was batting around, and I kind of fell on one that I wanted to just to be able to talk about. Um, an old sci-fi show starring our good friend Jerry O'Connell. and not the one you're thinking about.
Oh.
Oh.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
We're going back to see a show called My Secret Identity. So here's a question. Do we want season 1 Jerry O'Connell, who's just about to hit puberty, just a couple years after Stand By Me, and he's still got little chubby cheeks? Or do we want season 2, 3 Jerry O'Connell was like, oh, he hit that sprout. Good Lord. That's the Jerry O'Connell. I know.
Well, I'd like some eye candy, so I'm going to vote later seasons.
Okay.
Oh boy.
I'll try to figure out which episode.
Identity.
But yeah, that's what I'm going to go with. My Secret Identity.
Very cool. That's a show I have not thought of in a long time.
And it's all over YouTube. So
good.
I'll figure out an episode, throw it up on the Twitter or wherever.
It'll be
you
in the
follow
notes.
me.
If you get it to me
Yeah.
by
It
tomorrow
will.
morning, if you come up with it tomorrow
There you go.
sometime, I'll put it in the show notes. If not, look at the X. What do we? Is it X or is it Twitter? Are we just
No,
gonna
we're not
call it
talking
Twitter?
about it.
Okay, we don't talk about it. You'll find us
Yeah.
where you find us.
That's
Is what we're
Twitter.
saying.
Yeah, it's fine. It's a thing.
Yeah.
Or just come to the Discord.
Yeah.
Just come to the Discord.
Just go to Discord. twodorks.net/Discord.
So we do have an email from last week. Did we read Phil Rude's email about Smurfs?
Yes.
Well, we did.
Yes, we did at the
Yes,
end of
we
the
did.
show.
Okay.
We caught it.
Yeah. It came in right at the end. Okay. So no new emails this week. But if you want to email us, you can at
I'm gonna email about this episode. Let me
those
write
were the
it.
days show
Yes.
at gmail.com. That's those were the days show at gmail.com. Send your emails there. You can direct your hate mail towards me. I realize that I am put on probation. I'm not allowed to choose a show for 3 weeks.
Yes. Take that. That'll
I'm
teach
gonna
you.
get vengeance.
Aha.
Just wait. I don't know how, but I'm gonna.
We are also on the Twitter as those days show, so you can follow us there if you want to get updates on things as they come out. And this show comes out once a week usually. We take occasional weeks off, but that's because we want to all be here for you. We don't want to do the show part way.
Full power.
So next week is going to be a ton of fun with My Secret Identity. I can't wait because I love me some Jerry O'Connell. So this will be fun. But until then, for Amy, for Steven, for Audie, I'm Travis saying, what the hezmana did we just watch?